students, welcome to the massive open online course on international economics. Today, we are going to discuss a module that talks on a very interesting issue. This is called offer curve and the associated terms of trade. I'll surely decipher more on these two concepts, but at the outset of this module, a discussion of offer curve and terms of trade, I want to tell you one thing very candidly, that while discussing the offer curve, derivation of offer curve, and based on this offer curve, I will try to explain how the terms of trade is determined. And while doing all these things, I'd be using a few concepts, but I will not be explaining all those concepts in great detail. But students, in module 6, we will be discussing all those concepts in much detail. But yes, of course, the part or the issue that needs to be discussed, I will surely discuss so that you can easily follow the concept of offer curve and the derivation of the offer curve. Now, let us very quickly go to these two concepts one by one. So, you have to be a little careful because these two concepts, offer curves and terms of trade, are very important, and at the same time, these are a little tricky. So, if you miss a point, if you are less attentive during this course, then it would be difficult for you to understand the derivation of the offer curve. So, my request to all of you is that be attentive during listening this thing and try to follow whatever there in the diagram first and then how these points are derived. Now, before I go into the explanation part, let us try to define this offer curve. As you can see, the offer curve of a nation essentially shows how much of its import commodity the nation demands to be willing to supply various amounts of its export commodity. Let me explain a bit in more detail. The term offer, let us bank on this term. If I say that I'm going to offer you something, this means that I'm going to give you something. But there is nothing free lunch in this world. So when I'm saying that I'm going to give you this thing, it is sure that I'm expecting something in exchange of that thing. So this offer means it's a transaction between how much I'm willing to give you and how much I'm expecting from you in exchange of that amount. Now, as a rational individual, what I can expect that in the back of my mind, I always calculate the value of the good or service or the thing that I'm giving you and the value of the good or service or whatever that you are giving me. The moment these two values are equal, then I will go for this offer. This means my offer is satisfied at that point when these two values are equal. This means offer curve essentially talks about these 2 points, these 2 dimensions, these 2 concepts of giving and accepting or taking. So offer means I'm giving and I'm accepting. When I'm happy, when the values of this giving and accepting are equal. Now, I put the entire thing in a country perspective. A country should be happy if the thing that the country gives is equal to the thing that the country gets. So the value that the country gives should be equal to the value that the country gets. So thing and value, these two things are not same. Value means it should be price and quantity, and thing means it should be ideally the quantity or the thing that I'm getting or thing I'm giving. So for a country perspective, I'm giving something and I'm calculating in the hindsight the value of the thing, the good I'm giving to someone. And who is someone here? Definitely he is my partner. And who is my partner in international trade? Definitely my trading partner. So there is another country. So the question boils down to the thing, how much of a thing I'm going to give to my trading partner. If I want to get something from my trading partner, and when these values are equal, then my offer is satisfied. From the country's perspective, what I'm giving to my trading partner is nothing but export in international trade, and what I'm getting from my counterpart is the import of my country. So essentially, offer curve talks about the equality of values between two commodities or two services or two things per se. One is export, the other is import. So offer curve points to a point where the values of export is equal to values of import. So that's the bottom line of the offer curve. Now, the question is, how can I get this offer curve from a country's perspective? Now, the offer curve is essentially derived. I will explain the derivation technique in the later part of today's module, but to define it, it is based on certain concepts. One is production possibility frontier. Students, you all know the production possibility frontier of a country gives me what? Gives me how much of different commodities I can produce given the endowment of my factors of production. And also minded that the endowment of factors of production should be totally employed. So this is a full employment situation. And you know that production equilibrium should ideally take place on the curve, and which is usually concave to the origin, not convex. Concave means it is bowed out like this kind of shape. So if I'm on this curve, then I am fully employed. So given that endowment, I can draw the production possibility frontier. And students, you know there is something called indifference curve. And all the indifference curves taking together, what we get is indifference map. And for a country as a whole, I get community indifference map. And then the equilibrium. Equilibrium means production equilibrium takes place where the PPF is tangent with the price line or the price ratio for the goods. And the consumer's equilibrium takes place at a point where the indifference curve is tangent with the price ratio or the relative commodity price. So these are the three concepts that we will explain in more detail, in much more complicated way in module 6. But as of now, I'm pretty sure that these things are clear to you, how to base on these things to get the equality between production and equilibrium. And then we will focus on how much is there as excess demand and how much is there as excess supply. Because you know, excess demand and excess supply is the driving force for international trade. I will explain in a moment. I have a diagram to explain excess supply and excess demand for the trading partners. Just hold on for a moment. Now, the price ratio means the commodities that the country is producing. The relative price, if the country concerned is producing X and Y, then it could be PX by PY, it could be PY by PX, depending on what we want to explain or what the curve intends to explain or analyze. We can use the price ratio, the relative commodity price. And this kind of concepts are often used as, the term that we use is called reciprocal demand curve. So it is not the direct demand curve, but it is essentially the demand coming from my counterpart, coming from my friend, coming from my partner. So this demand for my import has to be reciprocated by the demand by the trading partner. What is that? Let me explain a bit. I demand something from my trading partner, and what I demand is my import. But I can import that commodity from my trading partner. Think of the example of India and USA. India wants to import car from America. So India demands car from America, but that's not the end of the story. This is the half-done story. It has to be matched by a demand by America from India. So the moment these two demands are matching, then we get the offer curve. So your demand or India's demands must be reciprocated by America's demand. That is why it is called reciprocal demand curve. And this concept is popularized by Alfred Marshall and Edgeworth. Both these economists are British economists, and they brought these two concepts and then helped the international economics analysis a very fascinating way. We found a kind of complicated issue to demonstrate those complicated issue in a simple diagram by a simple curve. not taking into account the PPC, community indifference curve and the price ratio. Instead of all these three curves, we get only one curve, so that makes our life much easier. And then, as I said, the value of export should be equal to the value of import. Unless these two are equal, the trade is not taking place, means trade is not satisfied. And this concept, this equality is called balanced trade, or the trade is balanced, means the values are equal. Now, as I said before, essentially it is not the quantity but the value that matters. For example, what I can say is that, say I export tea, India exports tea and India imports car. So 1 tea means a 1 kilogram tea or 1 unit of tea should not be equal to 1 unit of car. So what I need to look at, I need to look at the value of tea is equal to the value of car. Maybe if I want to import a very good quality car, the price is say 10 lakhs, then I need to export tea of value 10 lakhs. So $1 of tea is not sufficient to get one car. So if I want to compare 1:1, then I am going to do some massacre. So the thing that I need to compare or equalize is the value of tea with the value of car. So what I said is that I am going to explain the excess supply and excess demand in this diagram. Now look at this diagram, students. I have three panels, panel A, panel B and panel C. Panel A is nation 1's demand and supply curve for commodity X. And panel C is nation 2 or country 2's demand and supply curve for commodity X. Now the students, I want you to look at these two diagrams very carefully and look at the trick that I used here. Look at the diagram, the demand supply curves are placed a little bit lower, whereas for nation 2, the demand and supply curve are placed a bit higher. Now why? And you can ask me, then what is panel B? What did you do there? So essentially, B is the panel that defines how this trade is taking place and what is going to happen in this trade. Now look at panel A first. At price P1, the local demand is equal to local supply. Demand is coming from the demand curve and the supply is coming from the supply curve. So the demand is P1A and of course the supply is P1A. And if the demand is equal to supply, then the market clears. But the point I'm interested in is that whether market is cleared or not, that is not very important for trade. I need to check whether there is excess demand or excess supply. What I see at point A, there is no excess demand, no excess supply. Therefore, the question of trade does not arise at this price P1. Now again, jump cut to price P3. At P3, nobody is demanding anything because price is so high that the domestic consumers are not willing to get any commodity because they are not ready to pay this much a price. But when price is high, as you know, when price goes up, the producers, they try to produce more and more. So the supply should be high and so high that it is not shown in the diagram. If you extend the supply curve, you will get the supply here. But look, here there is an interesting thing that people are not demanding anything at price P3, but producers are supplying. Then what is happening? The entire commodity is excess supply. So if this is excess supply, now country 1 is in a position to export. Now in between P and P3, there is a price P2. Students, look at price P2. At this price P2, my demand is P2B, whereas my supply is P2E. So this part, BE, is the export or excess supply. And excess supply means I should have the option to export. Now let's go to panel C, where country 2's figure is explained. For the same price, P2, what I have is that the excess demand for the same good is BE. And this is exactly equal to the excess supply of export from country 1. This means at price P2, there should be a balanced rate, ideally, because your export is equal to import. And when price is P3, the foreign supply is equal to foreign's demand. Therefore, foreign is not demanding anything, though this home country or country 1 is willing to supply a lot. But country 2 is not willing to buy anything. So no trade takes place. Here, country 1 is not willing to sell you anything, but here is a huge demand in country 2. But still the trade is not taking place. So trade talks about the price ratios in between P1 and P3, where export and import taking place, export from country 1 and import from country 2. This is point number 1. And point number 2, the moment country 1 is exporting a commodity to country 2, in exchange of that commodity, country 1 is also getting something from country 2. So this export and import will have to match, and they should coexist in a diagram. That is not given here because this is partial equilibrium analysis. So we need to move to a general equilibrium analysis where both the goods, exportable and importable, are taken into account, and then how, depending on these two goods and PPF CIC, the offer curve can be derived. That we will explain in our next slide. Students, here is the tricky part of this offer curve module. I have to be very careful. Now let's start with this diagram. The left panel here talks about three things together. One is the price ratio, other is the PPF, other is the community indifference curve. As I said that these three things are the reflection of the offer curve. Now here the offer curve is a concave type shape. Here you can see this is the offer curve, and this equilibrium is taking place in two counts. One is production equilibrium, other is the consumption equilibrium. If there is no trade or autarky, the equilibrium must be at a point where production equilibrium takes place, and you would be on an indifference curve. So if I look at this diagram, let us start from a price ratio PB. PB is the price ratio. This is indicated by the steeper line, steeper straight line. The steeper straight line is tangent with the production possibility frontier at this point, indicating that you are producing this much of Y and this much of X. Now say trade opens up. If trade is opened, then at this given price ratio, means PB price ratio, which is a steeper line, you can do trade and exchange some goods with the thing that you want to import. And here from the shape of this PPF, it is apparent that this country has a comparative advantage in X. So X is definitely exportable commodity for this country. So the post-trade equilibrium, when the price ratio is the steeper line like PB, this much is exportable and this much is importable, because though the equilibrium, production equilibrium takes place at this point, your consumption equilibrium is taking place at this point. So what you are doing, you are producing excess of this X and you are demanding excess of this Y. And these two values are ideally same at this PB. But mind it, when these two values are ideally same, these two values may not be same if we consider a separate price ratio. Now think of that price ratio. This is PF. This PF line is essentially a flatter line. Flatter line means the slope is less than 1. Here, say it is half. So when the slope is less, the implication is that commodity price of X is now less and the commodity price of Y is now more. If commodity price is less for X, naturally the producer will produce less of X and more of Y. So that is why the production equilibrium is shifting from this point to this point, where X production is reduced by this much and Y production is increased by this much. And now your trading line is no longer PB. Now your trading line is PF. So you can now trade along this line. Whether there is welfare gain or not, that is not my concern at this moment. But I want to look at the balanced trade things. Now when the price line is PF, your consumption equilibrium takes place at point H here, where your community indifference curve 2 is tangent with the price line. So the point that I want to make is that when your consumption equilibrium is here and the production equilibrium is at this point, you are essentially exporting this much and importing this much. Students, you remember what I said, that at PF price, the price of X is relatively low. If the price of X is relatively low, more X should be given to the other country or to the trading partner to get either low or same amount of Y. Now you look at the diagram, students. Here, the amount of X that I am exchanging with the amount of Y is relatively more compared to the previous case. So the moment I see that I move from PB to PF, the price line changes, the quantity that I am willing to exchange with the values equal are changing. Now, if I put all these three things together in a simple diagram, the curve that I am going to get, depending on various price ratios, are like this. Two things I want you to remember for the rest of your life is: one, for a large country, minded students, I am saying for a large country, the curve, if both the trading partners are large, this is very important. If one is small and one is large, the shape would be different. But at this moment, consider that both the countries are large. The country's offer curve should be concave to the axis where I am measuring the exportable. Country 1's offer curve is convex to the axis where I am measuring country 1's exportable X. And then, depending on these price ratios, PB, PF, PA, then I can tell you how much of exportable X is required to equalize with the amount of importable. How much? That we need to calculate, because that depends on the price ratio. And then you connect all those points and you get the offer curve. If this is the offer curve for country 1, I will also get offer curve for country 2. Students, mind it. For country 2, the exportable commodity is not X. Rather, country 2, the exportable commodity is Y. So it is natural that for country 2, the offer curve should be like this one. I'll come to that offer curve derivation. Not derivation, because the derivation technique that I said, that will also apply for country 2. But the shape of the offer curve will be like the one as shown in this diagram. This is concave to the axis where I measured the commodity for which country 2 has comparative advantage. Now, depending on these two offer curves, I can get the equilibrium, and the equilibrium price ratio is called the equilibrium terms of trade. And how it is? The equilibrium terms of trade looks like this. Now, this is the offer curve for country 1, and this is the offer curve for country 2. And look at the point of intersection. You are connecting the point of intersection with the origin, and you are getting a line like OP. That is the equilibrium terms of trade for the trading nations. And at this terms of trade means when the equilibrium takes place at the point of intersection, this much of exportable is ideally equal in value with this much of importable, and both the countries are happy. So equilibrium means both the trading partners are happy and they are satisfied, means trade is balanced. And then if something happens with trade policy, then there would be some changes in the offer curve. For example, I can say you that if there is a tariff imposed by country 1 for its importable, the offer curve will shift or rotate. So if the offer curve rotates from the blue line OF, I'll get a red line OF prime. So naturally, my international terms of trade was OP. Now the international terms of trade is no longer OP. Rather, my international terms of trade is like OP prime, and the equilibrium takes place at this point. We may discuss as required if in future the implication of this change in offer curve and the equilibrium terms of trade. But as of now, I don't want to go into much deeper implication of this thing. But I have to say one thing that is very important. As I said, if one country is small, then what is going to happen? If one country is small, then the small country's offer curve will be like a traditional one like OL, whereas large countries' offer curve will be like a straight line. The implication is that whatever is done by the small country, international terms of trade will never change, because small country is small because its role, its contribution, its share in international trade is so small that it cannot influence the price of any commodity in the international market. So whatever the small country does, whether it is OL or OS or OT or OU, wherever it goes, the equilibrium terms of trade will always remain here like OP, because that is the offer curve for the large country. So for large countries, offer curve would be a straight line passing through origin if this large country is trading with someone which is small. So at the end, the takeaways for this module is that offer curve takes care of both export and import together. It is derived based on PPF, CIC and the price ratio, and along this offer curve trade is balanced, and from these two offer curves we get the equilibrium terms of trade, and following which both the trading partners can trade with each other. And for the large country and small country students, I am reiterating it that please remember, for a large country and small country, large country's offer curve is a straight line, whereas small country's offer curve is of usual shape. So that's all regarding the offer curve as of now. If needed, we will discuss more regarding the offer curve in future modules.